Okay. Thank you all for being here. And we'll have a slide later on looking at the impact over time, and my sort of hair color index of this room tells me that there are some grandparents here. How many people with me are grandparents? Okay. So we'll keep that in mind, because we keep talking about we're accused of not caring about our grandchildren. And I want to show you what that means to the alarmists. If we don't do something about the emissions you see in that slide, we're going to have more hurricanes, more tornadoes, more floods, and more droughts. All right? Now, that's a double trick statement. One, do you know what emissions do we see here? Do you know? Steam, all right? Always, every time there's a news story about carbon dioxide, they show smokestacks pouring out steam. Or else they show a picture of a smoggy city in China where we're actually looking at soot and not carbon dioxide. Here's some other examples. That one is clearer that it's steam, because you can see right where it comes out of the chimney, it's the water. This is one of my favorites. I've seen some of the climate activists show pictures of cooling tower emissions. There's not even CO2 in there. But so that's how you know that the science is on their side, that we're anti-science. If we were to see a sky full of carbon dioxide emissions, it would look like that. Okay. But let's suppose we want to tax that colorless, odorless gas. All right. What would it do to the amount of hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and droughts we're going to see? Essentially nothing. All right, Chip Knappenberger at Cato has done estimates of the temperature impact on CO2 emissions reductions, even assuming the sensitivity of temperature to CO2 that the IPCC says, even their high-end ones. And you get fractional degree changes at the highest end. Most likely we see nothing. But here's what I think is more important. We need to point out that we're going to have more hurricanes, more tornadoes, more floods, regardless of what we do. We've had them in the past. We're going to continue to have them. And you know that the alarmists will point to the very next Category 3 or higher hurricane that makes landfall as a sign of global warming induced by CO2 emissions, in spite of the fact that we are in the longest period on record without such a hurricane making landfall. They have to come back. I'm sorry, I hope I'm wrong, but it's just unlikely. Tornadoes are on a downward trend. Other people, other panels will go over this sort of data more thoroughly. We saw some last night. Okay. But what will taxing that colorless, odorless, non-toxic gas do to the economy? All right. It will raise energy prices. It will restrict economic activity. My colleague, Kevin Diaratna, who's a mathematician, computer programmer, and I got the code from the Department of Energy to run the Energy Department's own model. We can't call it their NEMS model. We have to give it a different name, so we call it the Heritage Energy Model. But it's the exact same code that they use, using the data that they use, but choosing different numbers for the carbon tax. They actually ran some carbon tax estimates. We estimated the impact of the latest one, the Boxer-Sanders proposal, which never went anywhere, which was roughly a $20 carbon tax starting in about 2013 or 2012 and rising by a certain percent each year. Here's what it would do, all right? To the size of the pie, this is not the transfer in terms of tax. We'll see that in a later slide. This is how much the pie shrinks. This is the economic cost of the carbon tax. And we see from 2014 to 2023, GDP shrinks on average by $224 billion per year. All right, so you can add those up, and then we're going to get trillions of dollars in aggregate. Again, this is using the Department of Energy's own computer code to estimate the impacts. This is not denier computer. All right, this is not a skeptical energy model. This is the Obama administration's Energy Information Administration's own multi-million-dollar computer code. What do we see from 2024 to 2035? The average lost GDP is $652 billion per year. All right, now, where are your grandchildren going to be paying their taxes? This is not something we're doing for our grandchildren. This is something we're doing to our grandchildren. And we see this, and this very consistent in all the economic impacts of anything, whether we look at our carbon tax, the regulations, the impacts grow over time. The hit to the economy gets worse and worse over time. It doesn't get better. We're not making them happier. Just like we're doing with our national debts, it's the same thing. We enact policies now, they pay for them. We think we're great. This is what's driving it. Going to the federal government if they were to enact a carbon tax of $20 per ton that rises at, I think it was 5% per year. Starting out, $120 billion per year going to the people. Who gets that? Hey, that's a good question, isn't it? Well, everybody has ideas for it, and it's not going back to you. Even though, when we looked at how we modeled it, we assumed that this money was not wasted, that it went back to the taxpayers. All right? That's sort of the best case we could ever hope for. This is the impact on jobs by industry. All right? Iron and steel mills, ferroalloy and steel products, initially a 6% drop, 10% drop by 2030. So the people that want to have a carbon tax to help the grandchildren apparently don't think that any grandchildren are going to be working in the steel mills. They don't think they're going to be working in aluminum. They don't think they're going to be working in mining the coal. So I don't know where that's coming from. Oh, that's right. We're going to get rid of it altogether. So in West Virginia, apparently they don't have grandchildren. So we don't need to worry about them. This is a differential impact by state, and it mostly follows the manufacturing intensity of the state. There's some anomalies in there that I'm not 100% confident in, but you can see that the pattern is where you're most coal dependent, you're most likely to get hit hard by carbon tax. Okay. Impact of the Boxer Standards carbon tax is the economic impact. Family of four, so we just took GDP divided by population, GDP losses divided by population, multiplied times 4, $1,000 per year on average through there. By 2016, we'll see employment drop by 400,000 compared to the baseline. So you run the model without the carbon tax, you get a certain employment in 2016. You run it with the carbon tax, that employment's 400,000 jobs lower. Coal production drops by 60%. Employment in coal drops by 40% because we did not assume we would be blocking exports, but of course there are regulations looking to do that at this point. Gasoline prices rise by 20 cents per gallon by 2016 and 30 cents per gallon over whatever the gas prices would have been in the absence of the carbon tax, assuming there are no additional regulations and so on that could actually drive that up higher, assuming we still allow fracking and so on. Electricity prices rise by 20%, 2017, 30%, 2030. Again, we see this always, that all the bad stuff happens later. The further down the road you get, the worse it is. Now, this is from another study we did on Obama's war on coal. Just assuming, okay, let's take his advisor's words that say we need a war on coal, which is one of his environmental advisors said that the day he released his climate action plan. You look at the regulations, what's the first thing? They're going after the coal power plants. They started out with the ones that have yet to be built, which are probably not going to be built. And then just recently, they came up with new, impossible-to-meet regulations for the plants that already exist. In our model, we just said, let's phase out coal. And again, we use the Energy Information Administration's code, all right? The Obama's Energy Department's computer model is the one we're using. We said, what if we just get rid of coal? We tried to get rid of it in 15 years and the model blew up. We tried in 20 and the model blew up. It simply couldn't handle it. So I think we ended up going out 20-some years, but this is looking at around 2030. Okay, before 2030, a third of the electricity will have been driven out. That is, coal would have been producing a third of it. It gets replaced. How does it get replaced? The fairy tale stories you hear are all about the new energy economy. We're going to have new, solar. We're going to have the wind. Who knows what we're going to have? What do we see here? Renewables. How much do renewables replace of the lost coal? Just 3%. Natural gas replaces 74%, which is why some of the gas people actually like this story, I'm afraid. Nuclear goes up by, the renewables lost 4%, the renewables replace 4%, nuclear replaces 3%, and my favorite is 19%, which they call conservation. I call you can't afford it, all right, because the prices go way up. And when we get rid of that coal, by the way, the natural gas prices go up by about, I think we came up with 42%. It costs a lot more. Eventually, we'll get the gas out, but trying to run it through as fast as they're trying to do by getting rid of coal, it can't help but drive up the natural gas prices. Not good for manufacturing. Okay, revenue neutrality. I'm going to let Marlo talk about that. But here's the people say, well, what if we took that tax money and we used it for something that was even more harmful? This is my schematic of that view of how tax policy is made. Somebody at AEI comes up with this great scheme. We're going to get rid of the corporate income tax, hire a courier, run this fantastic idea straight down to the Department of Treasury, say enact it, they do. All right, that's one view of how policy is made in Washington, if you in an ivory tower type think tank. If you're more realistic, you realize the path is a little bit more like this. It goes from the think tank, can't cross K Street. It's got to go up and down K Street a few times, which is where all the lobbyists are. Then you go around, you make a stop at Cato there at point C, where before they laugh you out of the room, they actually have a panel on the carbon tax. Fortunately, I don't think they're big supporters of it. You then have to get on Pennsylvania Avenue, run to one side of the House, one side of Congress, go to the other, go back and forth, and there's reconciliation. Then you finally get back to the White House where they put their magic stuff on it, and then it goes to Treasury. And here's what happens. Let me just give you an example. This is the last page of the Waxman-Markey bill in its first or one of its early drafts. 648 pages, which should be plenty long enough. This is the last page of the one that Congress actually passed. 1,427 pages. They were editing it as they were debating it. They were rewriting it as they were debating it. It ended up being, you couldn't even figure out what they had said in some of the places. It's because it was a feeding frenzy. They were going to get those hundreds of billions of dollars and divvy them up. Any event. Okay, well that's it. If you have questions on social cost of carbon, which they now want to use, which is twice the $20 per ton tax that we estimated, you can imagine if they put that one through, the damages would be multiples of what I've just showed you. Okay, thank you very much.